Welcome to Ditch Auto. My name's Jared, and today we are going to unbox and kind of go through some initial setups on the Canon 80D. Now, I have been a Sony guy for the last couple of years. Prior to that, my entire photography career of about 10 years was all Canon. I absolutely love Canon. I got nothing but love for Canon. I switched to Sony for, performance reasons, but Canon still produces fantastic cameras, and the reason that I went and picked one of these up is because of course material that I'm working on. I'm working on an entire course on using this camera, and I absolutely have to have one. I rented one a couple of times this last year, and we even have a little bit of content on this YouTube channel around the 80D. It's just a fantastic camera. It's an amazing camera, especially for the price. So make sure you click around to some of the other videos that we have here on our channel, and make sure to stick around and subscribe, because we'll be posting an update when I have my course ready on this camera. So let's take a look at what we have inside. This is the kit. This is the kit that comes with the EFS 18-135 IS-USM lens. Basically what that means is this isn't the baseline model. This camera does come in a body only, which means no lens. It comes with a, I believe it's an 18-55 STM lens, and then it comes in this model, and I believe there's one other model as well. There's also a filmmaker kit. I mean, there's all sorts of different options that you can get with this camera. So in the box, we've got our instructions, we've got our registration card. I can't remember the last time I actually opened one of these. I just set it to the side. But do keep in mind that the book is pretty useful, but the idea behind the course that I'm working on producing with the camera that's in this box is that I will teach you everything that there is to know about the Canon 80D, walk through it, showing you things as we use the camera, so you won't actually have to use the sometimes hard to read manual. Hold on to this because that's your warranty. That is the registration card. You want to make sure to save that. Should you lose your camera, it gets stolen, you have to file an insurance claim or anything like that, you have the serial number on the side of the box. You also have this as your proof of purchase, and I do recommend that you put that in a safe place and keep that somewhere just in case. So we've got the camera here. We're going to go ahead and pull some of the items out of the box. We've got the lens right here, battery charger, camera strap, and battery. So that's all that is in the box. Going to go ahead and set the box off to the side. Battery's fairly standard. I still have a whole bunch of these batteries. I highly recommend getting a couple. This is the LPE6N battery, and the LPE6, this battery is, it's a little bit bigger than standard camera batteries these years. You're gonna get decent battery life out of it. But if you start shooting video and doing other things with the camera, you're going to find that the battery does kind of get eaten up a little bit faster than if you're just using it for photos. And that's mainly because the shutter is wide open, the sensor is working nonstop, the display on the back is on. I mean, you've got a lot more going on when capturing video than you do when you are just simply taking photos. All right, so I'm just kind of pulling everything out of the packaging here. We've got the body, we've got the lens, and you know, as far as kit lenses go, kit lenses used to get a bad rap, and they still do because there's so much better glass out there. This kit lens, though, is pretty fantastic. This 18-135 performs really great. You're gonna get beautiful photos out of it, beautiful video. The autofocus is pretty good. I mean, sure, you're gonna get much better performance out of an expensive lens, an L series lens, a much better Canon glass. You're gonna get, crisper photos, but the lenses are just getting so good these days, and the sensors are so good inside the camera. I mean, it's just really hard to beat going and getting the kit just so that you have a flexible lens. So charger, I actually still already have one of these. I'm not gonna unbox it. I'm just gonna leave it brand new in the box in case I ever decide to sell this camera. Hey, they're gonna get a brand new charger out of it. So we've got battery, we've got lens, we've got camera body. let's go ahead and open up our battery and put that in the camera. Now, I do recommend that you give your battery a full charge before sticking it in the camera. You're not going to get much of a charge out of a battery that's coming brand new that hasn't been charged yet. You're going to need to charge it, but I failed to bring a charged battery in here with me, so I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here just so that we can kind of get the ball rolling. So your camera comes with a cap on the body and a cap on the back of the lens. So we're going to go ahead and put the lens on the camera. Just a best practice, whenever you open and expose your camera, I always recommend kind of holding it at an angle. Dust and particles and stuff fall and can just fall right in. Of course, with a little bit of wind, it can come in from the side or it can come in from the bottom. But I've just always found it to be a good practice to pop the cap off the end of the body, hold the camera kind of facing down like this, and then place the lens onto the camera. And the reason that I do it this way is because I would rather some dust or some gunk fall onto the back of the lens than I would fall inside the camera. These cameras do have a mirror in there that kind of protects the sensor, and typically the shutter is closed and the sensor isn't exposed until you turn the camera on and put it in that specific mode. But once stuff gets in there, it's much harder to get out, so I just recommend holding your camera in a way where it's not inviting stuff to fall in. This cap and these two caps fit together nicely, and we can set that off to the side. So when you power up your camera, the first thing you're going to need to do is set the time. Don't forego this. And let me explain. When you set the date and time of your camera, you are actually telling the camera to write that data. It's going to write that data to the file. So when you take a picture, it automatically adds that to the metadata of the file, the date and the time. What's great about that is that with today's technology, it helps with sorting your photos. If you go and upload this photo to Facebook or to Google Photos or some other sort of photo sharing service or storage service, it's going to categorize that photo by date and time. And if your camera is set to some default date and time, guess what date and time is going to be on your photos? It's not going to be the correct date and time. And it is not fun work to go and fix that data. You can do it with software, but it's just so much easier if you set the date and time in your camera. And then if you live in a state where you move the time forward or back for daylight savings, then go into your camera and make that adjustment just so that everything stays according to the way that it should. I've had people that I've worked with who have not done that, and then I go and import all their photos in, and all of a sudden the date's way off, the time's way off. Sync up the date and time of your cameras. If this is not your first camera and you plan on using two cameras, sync the date and the time up if you're going to be using two cameras at the same time. It's a tip that will save you tons of time down the road. All right, so we're going to go ahead and power this camera on. And the first thing we're going to be presented with is to enter the date and time, that thing that I asked you not to bypass. So just really simply, and you'll notice the default is January 1st of 2016. Just easily, really simply go and just set the date and the time. It's not going to take you much time to do this. Set the date, go and set the date. Today is the 9th, 2016, and it is touchscreen as well, so keep in mind tapping on the screen is going to affect that, and I need the time so that I can set the time appropriately, and that is 4:21. So I am going to rotate through and just set that 22, we'll say. Toggle through. Make sure we set the time zone to the correct time zone. And OK. Very simple. That is literally all you need to do to set the date and time. So now your camera is ready to go, and it is in automatic mode out of the box, which means take the cap off, start shooting. But I have some things that I'm going to recommend that you change. Now, if you are not an experienced photographer and you're not ready to go into manual mode or something like that, then you can stay in auto mode. That's totally fine. I do have a course, and the whole premise of Ditch Auto is to get out of auto, start shooting in manual, take more control of your camera. So if you're interested, there is a link below, and it's a free course. It's the Ditch Auto course. It's about 4 hours in length, and it's going to teach you how to get out of auto mode and unlock the true potential of your camera. Now, what's going to be coming soon is a full course on using this particular camera. I'm going to teach you how to get the most out of the camera, how to use all the settings, how to shoot photo and video, and I'm going to teach you how to use the manual mode, which is going to get you the best quality images out of this camera that you can get. So let me go through just a couple of things that I change initially in my cameras, and then I'm also putting out a video later this next week on the top 5 settings that I change in my cameras, and I think that they are extremely useful settings, and if you're interested, make sure to subscribe to our channel here so that you can check that out. So I'm going to tap on menu, and the first thing is the image quality. The image quality is set to a large JPEG. Now, this is going to be one of the tips that I talk about as being one of the first things I change. Depending on what you're going to do with your photos, you need to decide what size of photo you want to save. A large JPEG, you're going to get a lot of photos you're going to be able to take depending on the size of the SD card that you put in the camera. But if you want to truly unlock the potential of the photo that you take, you want to be shooting in RAW. Now, a RAW photo is something that's going to have to be processed using some sort of an application like Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop. There's even mobile apps these days. If you have a more modern iPhone or Android phone, Adobe Lightroom Mobile, and there's even some other photo apps that now accept editing RAW photos. And what editing a RAW photo means, or what capturing a RAW photo means, is that there's no compression that's been done inside the camera to that image. When you shoot a JPEG, it's compressing that image and it's saving it out as a JPEG, which means it's compressing the file down to size and it's removing some of the data so that it can make that file smaller and make it a JPEG. A RAW file is the untouched raw photo that the camera captures with the sensor, and it gives you all of that data so that you can edit later and have much more room to increase the exposure or make the photo darker or add some contrast or do any of those things. You get a lot more room when you have a raw photo. So you make that choice now, and you can of course always go and make that adjustment later. So our SD card slot here, I recommend with this camera that you get a decent performing SD card. There are SD cards that are extremely cheap. You can get SD cards for $5 to $10 that are going to give you 32 gigabytes of storage, which is a lot of storage, but the problem with those cheap SD cards is that the read and write speeds is not very fast on them. Now, this camera doesn't come with an SD card, so you may have already ordered one, or you may be considering what SD card to order. I'm going to put a link in the description with a couple of options for you on SD cards that I recommend that are on the cheaper end but still perform well, on up to the faster performing SD cards. Now, you'll really notice that performance issue with the SD card when you go to take photos and you're trying to take photos fast. Like maybe you're taking pictures of your kids playing sports and you want to take photos fast. What happens is that the camera is capturing those photos and it's adding them into the buffer. And the buffer is where the photos go before it writes them to the card. And as it's writing them to the card, it can only go so fast based on the performance of that card. Now, if your card is too slow, that buffer fills up, and then eventually you won't be able to take any photos until the buffer clears up enough to allow for enough memory to continue to take photos. Faster cards that have faster read and write speeds allow that process to take less time. It goes quicker. And because of that, you can take photos really fast and have them write to the card and not have a problem. Of course, there are some limitations to the camera itself, but the camera is pretty darn fast when it comes to writing photos to the card, assuming that you have a fast enough card. So check out those links in the description below to some suggestions for SD cards. The lens itself has a couple of modes. It has autofocus and manual focus. It has stabilization, and it also has a lens lock. The lens lock comes on by default. Slide that lock back, and then you're able to zoom this lens. And what the lock is there for is so that your lens doesn't accidentally become extended like this in the bag and stuff gets, this gets bent or this gets banged around. You want your lens, when you're storing your camera, to be in the locked position and fully contracted back into the camera. This is for the protection of your lens, and lenses aren't cheap. Even kit lenses these days are getting more expensive, and you definitely don't want to cause any harm to the lens. Make sure that you always put your cap back on your camera when you're done, and make sure that the lens is put back in and in lock mode. Now, you could turn stabilizer on and off, and basically what that does is it uses optical stabilization within the lens to minimize the shake that you're going to get from holding your camera in your hands. That's going to be noticeable when you are shooting video especially, and so the stabilization effect really helps when you're shooting video. To shoot video, you simply toggle your camera into this mode, and you're going to hear a click, and then you're going to see your camera go into live view mode, and you can, of course, tap to focus, and then just simply hit the start and stop button to start recording, and you're recording video. While you're in automatic mode, you will notice that you have less options available to you because the camera is trying to do as much for you as possible. So definitely a neat camera and neat options that it has. Manual focus and autofocus. I usually always am in autofocus unless I'm shooting video and I know my subject is not going to move. This camera does an excellent job at tracking subjects, so there's really almost no reason to turn autofocus off unless you're shooting a time lapse or you're doing something and you want the focal length to stay the same. Now, when in auto mode, your camera is going to do all the thinking for you. You don't have to worry about the aperture of your lens. You don't have to worry about the shutter speed or the ISO of your camera. Those are things that the camera is going to handle for you automatically. But to truly unlock the potential of the sensor and the abilities of this camera, you do need to take a little bit of control over that eventually and start to learn how to use manual settings. You're going to do that by rotating this dial here to M for manual. And then there's also AV and TV, which are a couple of kind of half automatic, half manual modes, and those are also great ways to kind of learn and get a grasp on your camera. Let me give you a real quick breakdown of what I do to shoot in manual mode. When I'm shooting photos outdoor, I'm shooting photos of people or anything that I'm going to be taking pictures of while I'm hand holding my camera. So long as they're not moving really fast, I typically set my shutter speed to around 1/60th, so 160. And you can see when I rotate this dial here, it adjusts my shutter speed. Now my aperture, and the aperture is how wide your lens opens up. There's an iris inside your lens, and it opens and closes to let more or less light in. And your aperture is this number here with a decimal point. So as I scroll down or I rotate the dial here on the back to the left, which is counterclockwise, 3.5 is my aperture, and I can rotate it on up all the way to 22, which is my aperture. 22 is the aperture as tightly closed, letting the least amount of light in, and 3.5 is as wide as the aperture will go. Now this lens has a variable aperture of 3.5 to 5.6, so if I take my aperture all the way down to 3.5 and I unlock my lens and I zoom in, that aperture is going to adjust, and it could adjust anywhere between 3.5 and then when I'm zoomed out, 5.6. That is kind of a deficit that some of the cheaper lenses has, is a variable aperture. And what I get bummed out about with variable apertures is, you might be shooting wide at 18 millimeters, so you're at 18 millimeters shooting wide photos, and you have your camera setting set, and you're like, okay, good, I'm taking good photos. And then you zoom in. Well, just the simple act of zooming in is going to change your exposure because the aperture of your lens becomes slightly smaller. And so it's letting less light in and it changes the exposure. So you have to be mindful of that. And these are things that I teach in my course, and I go through them a lot more in detail in the course that I mentioned that's free. And then the ISO is this button right here that says ISO. And you can adjust your ISO by tapping on that button and then rotating the dial on the back here. And what ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor in your camera. So think about it as, sensitivity is a good word for it. With your aperture, you're telling how much light you want to allow through the lens. With your shutter speed, you're telling your camera how long you want the sensor exposed to the light. And with the ISO, you're telling the sensor, whatever light does get through, how sensitive do you want to be when that photo is captured. And so ISO is a great tool, but if you turn the ISO and turn the sensitivity up too high, then you're going to get noise in your photo and your photo is going to be noisy and grainy. So you want to make sure that you don't go too crazy with the ISO while at the same time not going too slow with the shutter speed, because if you go too slow with the shutter speed, it introduces motion blur because the sensor is exposed and opened for so long that movement and camera shake and whatever else can be registered in the form of blurriness, especially if you're hand holding your camera. These are also things that I go deep into detail in the course that I've referenced many times and is linked below. So I hope that you are excited about your Canon 80D. I know I'm excited to have another one in my hands. I used it a few times this year and have just really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to now own one and to be working on some course material for those of you that are interested. So make sure to subscribe to our channel here on Ditch Auto. If you haven't taken our Ditch Auto course, I did the course with a Canon, actually with a Canon 5D, and pretty much all of what I talk about transfers right into this camera. So make sure to head on over and take that course for free. And if you're interested and you want to be notified when my 80D specific course comes out, make sure to click the link below in the description to sign up. I'll give you free access to being notified when I put that course out. And when the course comes out, you're going to get a special discount and special offer on that course. It's going to teach you everything that there is to know about the Canon 80D. By the time you take that course, you'll be taking professional images just as I would, of course, with your Canon 80D. So thanks so much for checking out this unboxing kind of overview look of this camera. I know I didn't go super into detail about specs or anything like that. I'm typically not a specs guy. I want cameras that perform well and do the job. This camera definitely does that. If you want specs, if you want information on this camera, maybe you haven't bought it yet, a link is in the description below as well to where you can see this camera over on Amazon. It's where I bought mine. They have great prices on it and all that good stuff, and they definitely have all the specs listed there. So hey, thanks so much for checking out this video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Give me a subscribe to this channel if you found it useful, and make sure to check out those links in the description below. And we'll see you next time here on Ditch Auto. Thank you.